Hello, this is our second week, and today we are going to discuss the second stage of development of geopolitics, which is classical geopolitics, which is associated with the period of the Cold War. Just a very short introduction to remind you what we have discussed previously. We have learned a very long period of development of the so-called traditional geopolitics that started in the end of the 19th century and that lasted until the Second World War. In the end of the Second World War, as we have discussed, traditional geopolitics was under great pressure. It was under great pressure by academicians, it was under great pressure by some politicians who didn't like how the Germans used traditional geopolitics in their foreign policy. And as a result, the only way for survival of traditional geopolitics was its combination with the realist tradition in international relations, and this is how the classical geopolitics emerged. However, the end of traditional geopolitics did not mean that geopolitics disappears. Rather, it has changed its background, it has changed its foundations, and it tried to slightly reorganize itself with the help of the scholars that studied this geopolitics in order to become more soft and more applicable to international relations after the Second World War. The end of the Second World War was followed by establishment of the new international organization, the United Nations Organization, which aimed to preserve peace in international relations. The United Nations Organization was some sort of symbol that was constituted in order to overcome the previous contradictions between the states and in order not to allow them to start another global war. The main states that initiated establishment of the United Nations Organization were the Allied powers, who made the biggest contribution to victory during the Second World War. They were the Soviet Union, the United States, and the United Kingdom. These three countries became the permanent members of the Security Council, which was the main and still is the main body of the United Nations Organization, together with two more permanent members, France and China, by that time represented by the Republic of China, who also contributed a lot to the victory over the Nazi Germany and Japan. However, the establishment of the United Nations Organization, of this symbol to overcome the previous contradiction, did not mean that new contradiction didn't appear. It is difficult to name the only event that started the new Cold War or who actually started it. However, we can say for sure when it was proclaimed. It was in May, on the 5th of May 1946, when the former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill gave a speech in Fulton, the United States. In his speech, he gave his view on how the situation in Western and Eastern Europe developed. On the one hand, he said that for the Soviet Union, it was reasonable to secure itself and to ensure its security in the European region as well as in the other regions. However, on the other hand, and here Winston Churchill started to take some geopolitical instruments to describe the situation, he said that the Soviet Union did not only try to guarantee security, but as well to spread its influence in the Eastern Europe, to expand its influence to the new states. And this situation, when the Soviet Union, with a different ideology, which opposed the Churchill's understanding of how the world should be governed, this situation was called by him an Iron Curtain, or as he said, an Iron Curtain has descended across the continent. It was not only the Churchill's view. This view was supported by many government officials. One of them was a representative of the US Embassy to the Soviet Union, George Kennan, who in 1946 wrote the document that is well known as a long telegram. And in this document, he described the situation around the Soviet Union and his own view of how the Soviet Union would act further. In this long telegram, George Kennan made three main statements. First, he mentioned that the Soviet Union lived in the situation of permanent sense of insecurity, meaning that it had a large territory and it was naturally difficult for such a large country to guarantee its security, and that's why there was always a fear of any foreign invasion, and that fear inevitably would influence the foreign policy behavior of such a state. Second statement, due to different ideology of the Soviet Union, George Kennan believed that this country would inevitably try to influence political systems of the other states, not only in the European regions, but also in different continents like Africa, Latin America, everywhere in the former colonies of the capitalist states or liberal democratic states of the West. And the third statement summarized the first two, that due to its permanent sense of insecurity of the Soviet Union and due to its desire to spread its influence, to spread its ideology worldwide, including the territories of the former colonies or of the colonies of the Western powers who had different ideology, due to all this, no permanent peaceful coexistence could be achieved among these two sides. There was a certain geopolitical background for such warnings. For example, in Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union indeed tried to spread its influence and to support the communist governments of the states in Eastern Europe that it liberated from fascism, or according to their logic or to the Western logic, that it occupied and tried to influence their domestic politics. The similar actions were made by the Soviet Union in other parts of the world, especially in East Asia, in China, in Vietnam, in North Korea, where the Soviet Union supported the communist governments as well. So the logic of George Kennan, that the Soviet Union's feeling of insecurity and its desire to spread its influence with the help of ideology, really worked in those times. Here in the map you can see that in the late 1940s, this foreign policy of the Soviet Union was rather successful. In Eastern Europe, in China, in North Korea, the communist governments were established, in the mainland China and in North Korea at least, and that meant that these communist governments, new governments, were very connected with the Soviet leadership. So, indeed, the influence of the Soviet Union spread across the Eurasian continent, and this situation really concerned the leadership of the Western powers, of the United States and of their Western European allies. The result of these concerns was the document that was declared in 1947, which is well known as the Truman Doctrine. In this Truman Doctrine, a new geopolitical worldview by the President Harry Truman was introduced. He officially divided the whole world into two parts, into us, meaning the capitalist world or the free world, and them, which meant the communist or the socialist world headed by the Soviet Union. And to all the other countries, it was offered to choose between these two camps in order to state clearly whether they ally with the United States and try to oppose the communist threat, or they ally with the Soviet Union and would inevitably be opposed by the United States and their allies. The Truman Doctrine was declared in Congress by the President Harry Truman, and in order to support the potential American allies, it was introduced that an economic aid could be provided to the countries that choose the American camp to be added to. A similar geopolitical doctrine was introduced in the Soviet Union. It was called the Brezhnev Doctrine, and it appeared in 1968, a little bit later after the Truman's Doctrine, and it was named by the name of one of the Soviet leaders, Leonid Brezhnev. In this doctrine, there were two clear statements. On the one hand, the Soviet leadership understood that every state had the right to choose its own path. On the other hand, it believed that the communist regime of every country should cooperate in order to protect the communist world from penetration from the capitalist world. And according to this logic, the Soviet Union was ready to assist, to provide assistance, to provide aid, and to support the communist regimes in the other countries with the help of economic aid, politically as well as militarily. All in all, we can say that geopolitics did not disappear after the Second World War. Geopolitics, being much closer to the realist ideas and to the realist approach to international relations, was still a very powerful tool to explain foreign policy of the states, as well as to explain the international relations at large, and to be used to make a statement about direction of your foreign policy, where the country should act, where it should project its power in order to provide its security. This geopolitical worldview was used by the United States in order to protect the free world from the communist threat, as well as the very same geopolitical tool was used by the Soviet Union in order to provide its security and in order to spread its influence and to protect the communist world from penetration from the outside.